Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Operation Gladio meets Secret Societies with War Hamster Brady. How are you today, Brady?
I am hot as hell. I've probably sweated off about 10 pounds the last 2 days because our AC units have not arrived yet, and we got hit with a heat wave.
So I did not know that the air conditioning dilemma was contagious, but evidently it is. But I do have an update. My husband was able yesterday, once we arrived at Fort Hood and received the part that we had ordered, he repaired one of the two that were not working. So we were now up to 2 of 3 air conditioners, and we are no longer in the condition that Brady is experiencing now. So we passed off our dilemma to Brady.
Yeah, it's getting a little bit better. I think we'll survive the weekend. Definitely heading out to the lakes this weekend, though, I think.
Good move.
Yeah. Well, I'm up here on the 3rd floor of our house. And which direction does hot air go? Oh, yeah.
Right up there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this should be our last episode on Skull and Bones, but I think we're going to next week want to do a big summary of everything we talked about. So it'll be the second to last. As we've been going through Skull and Bones, there are different alumni. We've been doing it in chronological order. They stopped keeping records in around the 1980s, or maybe it was 92 was last year. We got a few bonesmen that are worth mentioning, but I'm not going to go into detail on. There's Paul Giamatti, class of 1989. He's the son of Bart Giamatti, who is the president of Yale and Major League Baseball commissioner. And of course, Paul is a great actor. He also had last one was really worth mentioning, I thought, was Austin Goolsbee. He was a goofy-looking guy. He was the chief economist of Barack Obama's Economic Recovery Advisory Board, a big-time Chicago economist and a Keynesian. And he's never said a single thing I agree with. But we're not going to get, he's too boring to go into. We do have a couple of bonesmen that are worth talking about. And as we've been going through this series, obviously we've got the big picture is that these people go to these private grooming boarding schools. They go to the Ivy Leagues. A lot of them go to Yale. They get into secret societies like Skull and Bones. Many of them go off to Harvard Law or something, or Oxford in the Rhodes Scholarships, another somewhat secret society. And they find themselves, because of their connections, in all the bottleneck positions throughout government, industry, banking, State Department, CIA, you name it. And it's just such a small pattern. It happens over and over again. You got to start thinking it's more than a coincidence. Fair enough?
Yes.
Did you go live on Rumble?
Yeah,
it's there now. Sorry, my bad. I just didn't see the chat yet. Cheers, everyone. So the first guy we want to talk about today is, what is his name? Mr. Lampert. And hang on, I got to pull up. I got lost on here. All right, Eddie Lampert. And he is a bonesman, class of 1984. And let me grab his picture again. Sorry about this, everyone. I'm usually have my screen shares better prepared. There's Eddie Lampert. And you can see he is sitting in front of a Sears and Kmart banner, and we're going to get to that story because it's significant. That's Eddie Lampert. He's he's probably about 60 years old now. Okay. Why is he significant? Besides the fact that he went to Yale and became a bonesman. Class of 1984, he was born in 1962 to Jewish parents. And again, that's a big trend we've seen in the last several bonesmen that we've featured is, I think prior to this period of time, the last decade or two, I mean, Jewish people didn't even get into Yale, much less Skull and Bones. And that's just completely changed the last 2 decades. And, there's a lot of reasons for that, but, it's worth noting. So, Mr. Lampert, while he's at school, he's a hardworking guy. His dad was a senior partner in a law firm called Lampert and Lampert in New York. And in 1984, while he's still at school, he starts working as an intern at Goldman Sachs. And yeah. If you can pull it up while I'm talking,
Sure.
just do a search of vampire squid quote Matt Taibbi. And I want you to read that. It'll come right up. It talks about Goldman Sachs. It's a big part of today's today's story. So Eddie Lampert gets out of school and goes to work full-time at Goldman Sachs. He worked on the firm's risk arbitrage department from 1985 to 88. What is risk arbitrage? It's really fancy high finance. What you're basically doing is using derivatives, etc. Basically, these are the number crunchers trying to find ways of leveraging balance sheets to maximize profits. Whoever gets hurt in the medium, be damned. When he's doing risk arbitrage, he's working directly for none other than Robert Rubin, former Secretary of the Treasury under Clinton, also Goldman Sachs. And we'll find out later there are 3 Goldman Sachs alumni that became Secretary of the Treasury. So Rubin was the 70th U.S. Treasury under Clinton. He's the co-founder of something called the Hamilton Project, which, if we ever looked into, has a lot of fun skeletons. And of course, Robert Rubin was also the co-chair emeritus of the Council of Foreign Relations. His educational background, as you might guess, was Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, and the London School of Economics.
Of course.
And why is that funny, Colonel, if you'd like to explain?
Well, obviously, as we've discovered, the cross-pollination of the U.S. people in these secret societies and the London counterparts, illustrated through the Pilgrim Society, the RIIA, and the CFR counterpart. For everything that is in America, that is destroying America, there is a counterpart in the city of London.
Very good. Did you find that Goldman Sachs quote yet?
I think this is the one the world's most powerful investment bank is a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money.
That is it. It is my favorite opening stanza of any article in the last 20 years. Matt Taibbi got on my radar that day, and I've been reading his stuff ever since. And Taibbi's a lefty, but he's a very, intellectually honest writer, and he calls out his own side as well, as much as he does the other. But I love that. The vampire squid sucking its blood funnel at anything it smells like. I thought it was brilliant.
It is.
And it's very descriptive. That was written in 2009 during the great financial crisis.
Well, and it describes everything that we've ever said about the international syndicate.
Absolutely. All right. So in 1988, remember, he graduated Harvard in 1984, so he's probably like 25, 26 years old. After 4 years at Goldman, he forms a hedge fund called ESL Investments, and that's his that's his initials, Ernie Lambert, right? Eddie Lambert. He forms a hedge fund that was seeded by $28 million from David Geffen of Geffen Records. Some statistics about ESL Investments. Well, he was the first Wall Street financial manager ever to earn over $1 billion a year in 2004. Now, this is some different sources, but in 2006, his net worth is listed at $3.8 billion. 6 years later, he's number 367 on the Forbes Fortune list at $3.1 billion. And then 2016, he's number 810 at $2.2 billion. So this guy's managed to lose $1.6 billion in a decade. So where'd that money go? I'm going to tell you. He gets involved, his hedge fund. He takes over as the CEO of Sears Company. Remember we were talking about Sears last week?
Yes, I've talked about Sears a lot because it was initially all involved in intelligence.
Well, not so much anymore. So Lambert gets there and he restructures the company into about 30 different business units. He's a big fan of Ayn Rand, and he basically, what he thought her model was is the units were to buy and sell the services among themselves through competitive bidding. It doesn't work too well, obviously. In 2016, he held 28% of the Sears Holding Corp. which is worth about $408 million. They had just merged with Kmart, which was coming out of bankruptcy. So they had the two together in Sears Holding Corp. In 2017, he commits to provide an additional loan personally of $500 million to Sears. He's the CEO and chairman of the board at this point, and his employees don't like him at all. He's got a scorching temper. They say his employees say he's out of touch with reality. And during his tenure as a CEO, Sears lost about half its value and closed about half its stores. So this is just 10 years ago. So he steps down as the CEO in 2018, but remains the chairman. In 2018, ESL, his hedge fund, offers to buy all the shares of Sears that are outstanding for $4.6 billion in cash and stock. He puts no new cash into it. He finances it by $950 million in debt. So this is vulture capitalism. We buy an asset and start stripping it off for all its parts. That's what we're describing here. And this guy did a big one with Sears and Kmart. We good so far?
But who was the benefit of that?
The shareholders of his hedge fund. But
yeah,
sometimes
I meant across the industry.
The banks, the ones who make the loans. If they're
What
able
about
to.
Walmart?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because they kill competitors.
That's what I'm saying. I think a lot of these things are controlled demolitions. But go ahead.
Yeah, distressed debt investing can be really lucrative, but you have to use leverage to do it. If you don't do it right, you lose everything. And that's what happens here. Steps down as a chairman in 2019. 2019, the Sears creditors, they sue, alleging Lambert had orchestrated a multi-year and multifaceted scheme to strip away the company's assets. And one of the examples is Lambert threatened not to pay out $43 million in pension payments. So you go to work for this company your entire life. Some vulture comes in, buys up the company, sells off the pension funds to somebody else, and basically you lose your life's work. That's kind of how that works.
Yeah, it happened in the auto industry. All of the subsidiaries that were doing when the big gutting of our auto industry and the outsourcing of it, that the pension funds was one of the targets.
Yeah, this is what structured finance can do this. That's why it's considered a dirty word in some places. That's your risk arbitrage that he started out with Robert Rubin. 2024, they finally got a settlement. $177 million suit was filed in bankruptcy court against Lambert, which got paid. But anyhow, he lost about almost $2 billion of his own net worth, but he's still doing just fine. Lives on a really nice yacht that he named Fountainhead after one of Ayn Rand's famous books. And you can probably see that in New York Harbor every day today. So that's Mr. Eddie Lambert. Interesting guy, huh?
Yes.
All right. Moving along to the star of our show, I bring you none other former Secretary of the Treasury, Neil Mnuchin. Yes, that's him in front of the White House as dignity. That is Trump's Secretary of the Treasury from 2017 to 2021, one of the few members of his cabinet that was there the entire time. But he's an interesting story. So let's get into it. Stephen Mnuchin. Did I call him Neil?
Yes, you did.
I went to college with a guy named Neil Mnuchin. That's why. Actually, a fraternity brother. I can't believe I made that mistake. That's funny. All right. Born in 1962 in New York City. His father was Robert Mnuchin. Robert graduated from Yale in 1955. Served 2 years in the Army as a private. I believe that would have been Korea. And in 1957, he joins Goldman Sachs. Okay. The vampire squid, he stays there for 33 years, becomes a general partner in 1967, and then becomes the head of trading and arbitrage division in 1976. Now, why is this important? Well, right around 1974-75 is when they created the Black-Scholes derivatives pricing model. And that allowed these arbitrage, these derivative-based traders to price out derivatives of actual assets and start peeling them off. From that would be born the collateralized mortgage obligations, collateralized debt obligations, and we all saw those all implode on the whole world in 2008 and 9, almost took down the entire financial system. And here is Mnuchin's dad right there at Goldman Sachs at the very beginning of this. It's significant that he was there.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and Goldman's always been one of the top 2 or 3 firms in this kind of risk arbitrage stuff. That's really where they made their name. They took off right after that period of time. Goldman was not a blue blood bank up until that point in time. Of course, it might have had something to do with the fact that they were a Jewish bank, which meant that they were persona non grata on Wall Street in many circles up until the last 30, 40 years. There was absolutely anti-Jewish sentiment on Wall Street. And I bring that up because you got these people that say, oh, the Jewish bankers run the world. Well, they weren't really allowed to sit at the table until recently. So, and yeah, there's Rothschild money, in a lot of places in American history. They did invest in, things like, through JP Morgan into things like, US Steel. But the Rothschild wealth has been so dispersed in the last 100 years that they just aren't a major player in banking anymore. So I always like to address that myth when it comes up. Okay. So he then, after joining the trading and arbitrage division, Robert Mnuchin joins the management committee of Goldman in 1980. And with Gus Levy, famous name on Wall Street, he developed Goldman's block trading business. Do you want me to go into what block trading is?
Yes, just a little bit.
Yeah, well, when you and I go out there and buy and sell 100 shares, it's either done electronically on NASDAQ or it goes through a market maker on the New York Stock Exchange. Block trades are basically hundreds of thousands of trades going from big trading houses, money managers, mutual funds, what have you, and they don't actually show up on the exchange, so they don't necessarily move the price. What it requires is you to have an awful big book of your own, of the stock on your own books, because in Wall Street, you never want to go home long or short. So you hedge your position. But if I'm selling you stock, or say if I sell you stock I don't have, I've got to go out and find it and borrow it. In the meantime, I'm hedging my position with puts and calls, so I'm what's called delta neutral. This is where block trading comes in. That's why about something around 60-70% of all the trades on the New York Stock Exchange actually start on the Chicago Board Options Exchange, where one option controls 100 shares. And it's really complicated stuff. CBOE is just an amazing bit of work. And these traders are really good at hedging their position. They just want to make teenies. It's what we used to call it back with the decimalized Wall Street. They just want to make fractions of % on every trade. And they just don't want to ever take risk. And that's what block trading was all about.
Interesting.
Uh-huh. So Mnuchin.
And the significance of those not showing up on, as far as price on the stock exchange, is fairly significant, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there's an upward bias to the stock market at all times. Everybody puts money on a weekly, whatever the paycheck comes every week, into their 401k. Comes out of the paycheck, goes straight in. You got an automatic investment program. It probably goes into a mutual fund. Most of your mutual funds, most 401ks, the mutual funds are, you have like 10 choices, and usually they're like the 15 biggest mutual funds in the world. It's not a real good diversified portfolio. 401ks underperform. But there's an interesting thing that happens, because most of these big funds track their performance by what's called indexing, or benchmark to an index. You're basically going to own approximately the same kind of makeup as the S&P 500. So what does this do? Well, the S&P 500 is what's called market cap weighted, which means for every $100 you put into your mutual fund, which is basically buying into the S&P 500, the 10 biggest stocks in the S&P 500 get more of that $100, and the 100 smaller stocks get less. This causes the prices of the biggest companies to continue to go up with no change in their earnings in any way, shape, or form, just because of supply demand. And that money's coming in on a weekly, monthly basis. So it's always going to have an upward bias. Now, what that's going to do is periodically the price earnings multiple is going to diverge, because the price goes up and the earnings haven't. This is what we call a bubble. It's what we saw happen in 2000 when the PE ratio got over 30 to 1. It's what we saw in 2009. There was a bubble going on. The financial crisis triggered it, and it's something that could happen again. It is a boom or bust cycle of investing, which is why we diversify and hedge our bets. Block trading would move, you're moving a few 100,000 shares in a given day. That would drive prices. It would just move it way too fast, and it would create market instability. So that's why that's important. The big boys get to play under different rules than you and I.
Exactly. That's the bottom line right there. And I knew you would get to that. That's exactly it.
Yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah.
All right, enough of nerdery. So Robert Mnuchin retires from Goldman Sachs in 1990 to pursue his lifelong interest in art. Got it from his mom and dad. Becomes a big art dealer in New York. And why is that important?
Because money laundering happens in the art world. That is one of their real estate is number one. Art is probably number two or number three for money laundering.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with art at that level. The amount of buyers out there, it's a very small, limited pool. And valuations can change quite a bit. And it's a wonderful way. You get to sell it as a long-term capital gain instead of income. There's all kinds of neat little things for that. We've talked about real estate, why the National Association of Realtors lobby has for 3 decades successfully kept minutes of Congress, didn't hold them to anti-money laundering and know your customer rules. That's why.
You can buy art with cash too.
Yeah, yes, you can. The other thing about Mnuchin, which is interesting, is he's a lifelong contributor to Democrat politicians. So that's Dad. Now we get back to Steve Mnuchin. Grows up in New York. Attends a private high school, a grooming school that is a member of the Ivy Preparatory School. The name of the school is the Riverdale Country School. Because of course he did. And it's not that exciting. It's not that exciting with school. It's a college prep school in the Bronx. I'll just list their alumni real quick. Senator Richard Blumenthal from Connecticut.
Oh my gosh.
Dan Abrams, chief legal affairs anchor at ABC News. Always got to have the media in these things, right?
Yes.
Does anyone in the media ever come from a public school?
No.
Doesn't seem like it. How about famous actor Chevy Chase? That's pretty cool. Here's one of our favorites.
Have Hollywood too.
Yes.
As much as they need journalists, they need Hollywood.
Uh-huh. And we had Molly Jong Fast, one of our favorite reporters. She's an idiot.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah, everything she says is some kind of a race baiting. It's ridiculous. Oh, here's some alumni you might have heard of. JFK and RFK. Yeah, they both went to this school. How about singer Carly Simon? Now I'm going to bring up this next guy, the last one. It's funny. A guy by the name of Michael Zacharin. Probably nobody's heard of him. He's a guitarist for a band that I mentioned previously called The Bravery, who I happen to like. Well, that's interesting. Why did we bring him up before? Well, because the lead singer of The Bravery was a guy by the name of Sam Endicott, who went to private school at Phillips Andover. You want to explain that one to me?
It falls in line with you got to have the journalist, you got to have Hollywood, and you got to have the music industry.
Yeah, but how do you get two guys from different prep schools end up joining a band? And they started at what's in that CBGB in New York City? I've been to that club. That's where these guys got their start. Same place as the Goo all started. That's The Bravery. I like their music, but it's weird. Okay.
It's all connected.
Yeah. Okay. So now Steve Mnuchin graduates Yale, and of course he goes to work at Goldman Sachs. The vampire squid. He's there for 17 years. And what he does there is interesting. 94, he's the head of the Mortgage Securities Department. Want me to repeat that?
Yes. For emphasis.
He's the head of the Mortgage Securities Department. What do? Well, they're putting together these collateralized debt obligations, collateralized mortgage obligations. You know, the same toxic pieces of paper that blew up and caused the great financial crisis? Yeah, he's there at Goldman at the very beginning of this. And Goldman got a bailout for their mortgage
Yes,
securities, even though they weren't a bank,
yes, they did.
because of their political connections. Guys like Robert Rubin and oh God, who's the other guy, the former Goldman guy, Tim Geithner.
Yes.
That's why they got their bailout. So Mnuchin in '98, he starts overseeing all mortgages, bonds, and money markets. The money market part is interesting. During the Great Financial Crisis, they were very concerned about money markets breaking the buck. And what that means is the net asset value of a money market should always be $1 per share. And they're able to keep it there because they buy very short-term loans, 30, 60, and 90-day corporate paper, federal paper, stuff like that, really low-risk AAA paper that just recycles. And they're able to give you a better rate of return because of the money market than you would get in a savings account or a checking account. But I'm here to tell you, people, money markets are not invulnerable. They are not necessarily FDIC insured, and they most certainly can go down in value. It's basically a mutual fund that's investing in very high-quality loans of high-quality companies, but no company is invulnerable. In 2008 and 2009, enough of these companies, like Lehman Brothers, went under that some of the biggest money markets almost broke the buck, and there would have been a mass exodus, run for the exits, and there was to some degree. When people see their money markets going down in value, that's your safe money. And that's what Mnuchin was doing. So he knows all this stuff. He becomes a member of the executive committee of Goldman and a co-head of technology operation of the technology operating committee. This is '99. Technology is coming in. Of course, Goldman is, of course, underwriting a ton of the tech stocks. 2001, he becomes the executive vice president and the co-chief investment officer. And that's his career at Goldman, but it's his background, and I think it's important. CBGB. Thank you, Renee. Did I get it right? Yeah, that's it. All right. So 2002, Mnuchin leaves Goldman and gets into the hedge fund business. First thing he does is he becomes a vice chairman of a company called ESL Investments, which was formed by our last bonesman, Lampert, who just happened to be Mnuchin's college roommate. Okay.
Because they had to have been there in the same year, right?
1 year apart.
Yeah.
Interesting, right?
Yes.
All right. In 2003, Mnuchin leaves to become the CEO of something called SFM Capital Management. This is a hedge fund backed by George Soros. I'll leave that there for a bit. I did a real big deep dive into Soros's career getting government grants going back to 1982 yesterday on Zaki Radio. I'll have that up on my channel soon. I was going to have the Colonel do this dive with me live on the air, but since she's traveling and I'm busy this week, I don't think we're going to have time, and I couldn't let this stuff go. Data Republican gave us a good database, and I took it from there and started running with it. So I did about an hour-long George Soros, I guess, rip session yesterday. All right. 2004, he founds a hedge fund called Dune Capital Management. This firm would then invest in two of Donald Trump's projects, the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Honolulu and the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Chicago. Interestingly enough, Trump would sue Dune Capital over the Chicago project before a settlement was reached. So that's how Trump met Steve Mnuchin.
That is a very interesting story, isn't it?
It is. There's a lot more to that. I didn't go into it too deeply, but yeah, Trump won the case, by the way. 2004. No, say it again.
I said because of course he did.
Yes. The art of the deal. All right. Mnuchin's Dune Capital Management launches something called Dune Entertainment in 2004. And a lot of the movies big movies from the last 20 years came from Dune Entertainment. And Dune Entertainment and Dune Capital Management is named after a place near Mnuchin where he grew up, but I think it's on somewhere on the New York shore. I have to look it up, but here's some of the movies that they produced: X-Men, the whole franchise, Avatar. Interestingly enough, the guy who wrote Avatar, people always comment that as Avatar really looks like if you're scuba diving through the kelp beds off La Jolla. That's really what it looks like, and it's beautiful diving into kelp beds. Well, that's because the guy who produced Avatar was a big scuba diver, and he modeled it after the kelp beds off of I want to say not Santa Onofre, somewhere further up north, near Big Sur. I forget the name of the dive spot, but it's a big one. So that's why Avatar looks like a kelp bed, because the diver is, and I've met the guy at several diving conventions. So funny, small world story. American Sniper, Mad Max Fury Road. He's co-financed all the Fox films since 2006. And then he would purchase DreamWorks Pictures with a group known as Soros Strategic Partners. Just leave that hanging for a bit.
So can we, are you going to go into the two people that he was in business with there?
Someone I left. Go ahead.
So when they created Dune Entertainment, there were two people that were basically running it for him. One was Brett Ratner, and the other one was from Australia, James Packer. So I ran across this Brett Ratner guy a while ago, and what's really, really weird, obviously he also was involved in Rat Pack Entertainment.
Yeah, I left that out. Yep.
Yeah. So if you start looking at all of this is the psychological operation part of all of this. Okay. What was really interesting to me, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up every time I find someone from the Miami Beach area, just because of the large CIA presence and the Cuban exiles, which was our known Operations Gladio cells. And this Ratner family is a Jewish family, and his grandfather was notorious for creating decon mail order rat poisoning, which is very interesting because of so many, and I'm not making any allegations here, of so many of the people that have been involved in the United States, just specifically with poisoning, that had been part of the whistleblower network or whatever. But it goes on to say that his mother was born in Cuba and came over as part of the Cuban exile community. And so I was like, are you kidding me? This is crazy. And it also says that his biological father was a guy by the name of Alvin Malnick, a lawyer and businessman with alleged organized crime ties in the Miami Beach. So his ancestors are infested with all of this, and he's the guy that Steve Mnuchin picks to basically run this media company. One of the two.
Very successful media company too, I might add.
Yeah, it's a crazy story.
Yeah. All right, so back into this business is Mnuchin would then serve on the board of directors of both Kmart and Sears Holdings. Becomes the director of Kmart when it exited bankruptcy through the ESL investment. Kmart merges with Sears to form Sears Holdings. Sears Holdings becomes bankrupt in 2018. The company's estate, which means the remaining shareholders that got screwed, sued both Lampert and Mnuchin for asset stripping, and there was a $175 million settlement. Here's another fun story in 2005. Mnuchin and his brother had liquidated all of his mom's investments and made about $3.2 million. The problem with that is mom's investments were all within, she's a longtime investor with a guy by the name of Bernie Madoff. Well, this is 2005. They get all the money out of Madoff's fund. 2008, Madoff's whole thing crashes. This goes to court, and the Madoff trustees, the courts rule you could only sue people who had cashed out if it was less than 2 years before the 2008 crash. And Mnuchin and his brother got out 28 months before. So with 4 months, they knew what was coming down. Mnuchin was able to pull all their funds out. One of the few.
And legitimately, since he was in investing, he may have been able to look at what was going on and know that it was not a legitimate thing.
Okay, fine. But his dad was a Goldman banker for 33 years, and he let his wife invest with. Come on.
That's a good point.
If my wife, she wants to make an investment, she's going to talk to me first. Guess what? We're not investing with Bernie Madoff.
Or a Bernie Madoff type scam. So, and you, as a reformed Wall Street banker, believe that you have the intellect to be able to figure out what those things look like prior to them being revealed. And that's an excellent point here, because of what you just said. So it wasn't like she's sneaking her Social Security money off in some investment account, that sum of money would have been known to her husband, and there's no way he would not have known what it was.
Especially a guy at that level of Goldman Sachs, they know what's going on. I mean, a lot of insiders knew what was going on, but they were early investors in the Ponzi, and they got out before the music stopped. And I'm calling bullshit on that. It's infuriating.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah. I could stop right there, but there's more. All right. During the 2008 financial crisis, Mnuchin was bidding and lost. He got outbid from Merrill Lynch's CDO obligations of about $6.7 billion. And the idea of that, of all these assets, these collateralized debt obligations, CMOs, they're packaged into one little fund. All these outstanding mortgages, their paper value is still at 100 cents on the dollar, but the real value is about 50 cents because most of these underlying securities are going to foreclose. So you're trying to buy it at 25 cents on the dollar and make your money by recouping some of it. And there's a bunch of ways you can make up money on buying these distressed assets, and we'll get into that. But Mnuchin's in on this. So that doesn't work, and Mnuchin his fund buys failed bank in California named IndyMac. And I'll never forget where I was the day IndyMac failed, because I was still working for, at the time, Citigroup's company, Smith Barney. And I was in Santa Barbara at a recruiting meeting by Morgan Stanley. And we were having a meeting, and all of a sudden the news goes across the ticker, and everyone's freaking out. What, another bank's failing? And Wall Street, we're freaking in Wall Street. People were not happy. I ended up not working for Morgan Stanley, but that's a different story. So IndyMac's in receivership from the FDIC and owned about $23.5 billion in commercial loans, mortgages, and mortgage-backed securities. IndyMac was a huge subprime lender. That's how they got in trouble. They made loans to people who couldn't afford to pay them back. So $23.5 billion in assets, and Mnuchin's able to buy it for about $4.7 billion discount to the book value. So he got a great bargain from the FDIC. But he had to raise some capital to do it, and his investment group to buy IndyMac included people like, George Soros, John Paulson, Michael Dell of Dell Computers. That's who bought IndyMac. Here's where it gets fun. As part of that sweetheart deal, they're getting a discount on the assets. The FDIC also agrees to retain some of the most problematic assets, and they sign what's called a loss sharing agreement. Means anything that they make money on, but what by IndyMac, they get to keep. And anything they lose money on, the FDIC pays them back on the losses. It's a get out of jail free card they negotiated. Kind of a sweetheart deal, yeah?
That's crazy.
Yeah, it pays to be from Goldman Sachs. The FDIC would end up paying him $2.4 billion under that loss agreement. It's a lot of friggin' money. Mnuchin then reorganizes IndyMac as something called One West Bank. That's in Los Angeles. It would, yeah, let me share the screen. This is worth it. So Mnuchin moves to Bel Air and purchases a 20,000 square foot house. And that is worth looking at. You want to see what a 20,000 square foot house looks like?
20,000 square foot.
That's where Steve Mnuchin lives, or lived. It's beautiful,
Wow.
huh?
Yeah, that's nice.
That's Bel Air for you. Doing business with the FDIC pays off pretty well.
Yeah.
All right. So what's One West up to? He buys several other failed banks, including First Federal Bank of California and La Jolla Bank, which is where I used to bank once upon a time, which is funny. Buys a portfolio belonging to Citigroup Holdings for $1.4 billion. These are more of these junk loans. He's buying them, and they're trying to strip out everything for every asset value they can. And what they're really doing is they're aggressively foreclosing on homeowners. That's why they're buying these loan portfolios, because they've got a loan. They get paid by the FDIC when they foreclose. It'll become the largest bank in Southern California with $27 billion in assets. In the first 5 years of One West Bank under Mnuchin's ownership, they foreclosed on 36,000 homes. It's good business. In 2015, One West gets sold to something called CIT Group, not related to Citigroup. CIT Group is a subsidiary of, I think, Citizens Bank. I'm sorry, First Citizens Bank shares. It's a big financial services holding company. And he sells the company back for $3.4 billion. Mnuchin would stay on as a board member of CIT Group. Of course, he has to resign in 2016 when he got nominated as the Secretary of the Treasury under Donald Trump. And at the time, he owned $97 million in CIT stock, which is problematic because he's now going to be the Secretary of Treasury. He was one of the regulators of CIT Group. So you can see where that might be a problem, right?
Right.
Okay. In 2016, there's a FOIA group was requested to the HUD, Housing and Urban Development, about their reverse mortgage subsidiary, about One West reverse mortgage subsidiary called Financial Freedom. It was found, now these are real numbers from the FOIA request. They had foreclosed on 16,220 federally insured reverse mortgages from 2009 to 2016 when Mnuchin owned it. Why is that? Is that a lot? Yeah, it is, because that's 35% of all the reverse mortgage foreclosures in the whole country, and they only had 17% of the market share. So they're foreclosing at a rate that's more than 2 times what the average, what the market is doing. Now, were their loans that bad, or were they just aggressively foreclosing? The whole reason they did that was because that loss sharing agreement deal they cut with the FDIC. You and I paid for that FDIC insurance with our bank deposits.
Yep.
So in 2017, there's a leaked internal memo from the California Attorney General's office that stated that the prosecutors had found over 1,000 violations of foreclosure law done by One West under Mnuchin's supervision. The prosecutor declined to file a suit. Do you want to know who that prosecutor was?
Kamala Harris.
Bingo. Sleep with dogs, you get fleas.
But that's
So
why
these-
people need to understand this is not a right or left. This is not an R&D. This is a 2 wings of the same bird.
Yeah, it's just, we're exposing the rot of Wall Street and how it flows over into politics, and one enables the other. So, and it's not a right or left thing. Okay, so he's the Secretary of Treasury during Trump's whole term, but how did that happen? He was an early supporter of Trump when he came down the escalator. He had known Trump for 15 years. When Trump wins the nomination, he becomes the national finance chairman, raises over $500 million. He would complain that his friends in New York and California didn't want to be friends anymore. Trump derangement syndrome going on already. But he had some really good economic goals, and he was a decent Treasury Secretary. He's always stated that the average Americans, they wanted wage increases and good jobs for the average American. He wanted 3 to 4% GDP growth, and he got it. His number one priority is tax reform, and he did a decent job on that. After the great financial crisis, they created a new financial regulatory scheme called the Dodd-Frank rules, and Mnuchin wanted to strip out part of it because he said it was too complicated and prevented banks from lending. But it wasn't too complicated for him and his bank to basically rape, pillage, and plunder, was it?
No.
So he goes up in front of the Senate Finance Committee, and he gets they approve his nomination at 11-0. All the Democrats boycotted the vote. So it was unanimous from the Finance Committee because the Democrats didn't show up. He'd get confirmed in the Senate 53-47. The only Democrat who crossed over was West Virginia's Joe Manchin. And of course, he's the third Goldman alumni as a Secretary of Treasury after Henry Paulson and Robert Rubin. And of course, Paulson was at Goldman during the was at Treasury during the financial crisis, cutting all these deals to strip out all these assets and save the banks. So that's the Goldman Sachs connection there, and it's pretty damn dirty.
That's crazy.
Yeah. His tax reform bill got a lot of criticism, and I want to share this. They said that he was trying to lower taxes and increase revenues They said it couldn't be done. Let's see how that worked. This is the federal government current tax receipts. So it started 2000. You see a bit of a drop off here. That was the dot-com crash. Start climbing out of that with a real estate bubble. Look at the big crash there. Government doesn't get any tax receipts because of the great financial crisis. Obama's in and tax receipts start going up pretty strongly, almost doubling. Trump gets in with Mnuchin's plans. It looks like tax receipts stayed pretty darn stable. Then, of course, we get the COVID shutdown. And what's happened to tax receipts from the government since? Gone through the roof. Hopefully this levels off. And we think it might, but we'll see. Spending needs to come down too. All that's to say is Mnuchin was a pretty decent Treasury Secretary when it came to that. During his confirmation process, there was an issue that he had failed to disclose $95 million of real estate in a tax haven. Should I get into this right now? Let's see. 1 second. And he's the kind of guy that doesn't make that kind of paperwork error. This is he's revealed in something known as the Paradise Papers. Let's get into that real quick.
Okay.
We've got time to do that. All right, where's my screen share? So this is not the Panama Papers. These are the Paradise Papers that came out in somewhere around 2017. This is put together by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, and everything I can see about the ICIJ, they've got their leaks database is pretty darn solid stuff, and you can find a lot of dirt in there. They found a lot of current and former heads of state of their countries defined by their political positions, blah, blah, blah. The Paradise Papers are people who were using usually Caribbean offshore banks to hide money from their basically offshore companies. So let's just go through this pretty quickly, the list of people who are named in the Paradise Papers. And I'm going to say this up front. There's actually legitimate reasons to use offshore vehicles. There's not necessarily money laundering, but a lot of the times it is. So this is not quite guilt by association to be on this list. Charles III.
But it's very suspect.
Yeah, it's worth asking questions.
Yeah.
Current heads of state: King Charles III of the United Kingdom, President of Azerbaijan, Elizabeth II of the UK. British royalty hiding assets offshore. Presidents of Costa Rica, Colombia, Liberia. Oh, and Petro Poroshenko from the Ukraine.
What does all of those things have in common? Costa Rica is a corrupt CIA haven that they were running operations out of. Colombia obviously was the king in Latin America for drug trafficking. Liberia has been used repeatedly and cooed by the CIA because that's the country that had the original repatriation of the Africans that were brought over as slaves. We basically went and stole land and created a U.S. colony that most people don't even know existed, called Liberia. And then when we discovered there were resources there, we and supposedly we invited the Africans that were freed during the Civil War to go back over there to their quote unquote new country in Africa that was a colony of the United States. And you know what those people did? They turned around and enslaved the indigenous people in Liberia. The entire government over there has been corrupt all along. Of course, we know Ukraine's corrupt. Who else do we have on this list?
We'll get there in a second. I want to address a couple comments in chat. McModern put the Paradise Papers link for the ICIJ website. Thank you. The name who I did not see on here was a guy by the name of Vladimir Zelensky, and I'm pretty sure he was there. So McModern, can you give a quick look and see if you can find Zelensky in there? Because this is Wikipedia doesn't have him listed, but I'm pretty sure that's how we found out Zelensky had a $25 million mansion in Miami. So the other comment, what's interesting, is Treberg says, David Rogers Webb, The Great Taking makes it pretty clear. I highly recommend watching The Great Taking. It was a very well done. And the guy who wrote it is sharper than I am when it comes to international finance. He knows his stuff. So great suggestion there, Treberg. All right, continuing. Some former heads of state. We got Pakistan, Canada. We got two. Got Moroni of Canada. Gerhard Schroeder of Germany. Prime Minister of Qatar.
Not Qatar. Are you kidding? Go back up a little bit. Oh yeah, Pakistan, the country that's owned by the CIA. Go ahead.
Got some cabinet officials. I'm going to go a little quickly here. India, Kazakhstan. It's all the countries you'd expect. Any good names? Okay, here we got U.S. Mnuchin, Penny Pritzker, Wilbur Ross, Rex Tillerson. Hey, that's three members of Trump's cabinet.
What the hell?
And Penny Pritzker was on Biden's cabinet.
And Pritzker of the Pritzker family goes way back to the corrupt mafia. Pritzker was the mafia preferred law firm. They made their money in hotels that were originally brothels and the running of illegal liquor.
And not to mention crashing banks, then cashing in. Members of legislatures. I don't see any names who really stand out. Let's see what happens when we get to the U.S. I don't have any yet. Strikingly few Russians. A lot of UK members. Other government officials. We got El Salvador, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia. Khalid bin Sultan. We know that name. All right, United States names. Here's some other names. Oh, General Wesley Clark, former Supreme Allied Commander of Europe.
NATO commander. Let me just make that clear. NATO commander. And the guy that said we were going to take 7 countries in 5 years and was solely responsible for the Bosnia air war. Yeah, that guy.
McModern found Zelensky. Thank you, buddy. Let's see what I got. Oh, it's not going to pull up for me. All right, we'll talk about
Huntsman, ambassador to Russia.
Yeah, former presidential candidate. And we mentioned, wait a minute, we mentioned Huntsman recently. Let me see what we talked about him about. Why was he on our list recently?
Yeah, he has a very interesting story. Actually, his whole family. Interesting.
Huntsman was on the Atlantic Council, and he was also U.S. ambassador to both China and Russia.
Yeah.
And he sat on that Atlantic Council with none other than Susan Rice.
Oh, and look, you've got Brofman on there. The entire, I mean, that's the Seagram Brofman that was the sex cult. His I don't know if it's his sister or somebody related to him.
Yeah.
Yes, all of that.
The Bronfmans made their money in basically cooperating with the mafia and running booze into America.
Yeah,
they are they're still one of the biggest distillers in the world. And look what it says here: close friend of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
I'm just shocked that all of these people that have all of these really odd connections would have offshore bank accounts.
Did you see where Ibrahim Mahama, the brother of former President John Mahama of Ghana, was listed? John Mahama is an interesting story. Yeah.
Well, I see Suharto.
Uh-huh.
Children of, okay, so Suharto is the guy that the CIA propped up to overthrow Sukarno in Indonesia. So he is he got rich off of being paid by the CIA to overthrow the government of Suharto so that the Standard Oil Group and some people out of Europe could go and harvest a mountain of gold and their pure oil. That's where they got their money. And so that's his kids with their inheritance.
Yeah, this is really, it's really interesting. These are relatives and associates of government officials. All of these people, a brother of a president, a wife of a prime minister, the children of former President Suharto, you're using family members to hide your ill-gotten gains offshore.
Yeah,
that's what this is.
That's exactly what this is.
Yeah. Got Montenegro, Dukonovic. Yeah, it's just over and over. Oh, here we got the United Kingdom. Charles, Prince of Wales, more British royalty. All right, anyone else on here worth doing? Non-government officials and other people, multiple citizenship. Any names jump off here? Mark Rich, major shareholder of Incor. Oh, how about George Soros?
Well, of course he's going to be on there.
He's all over this story today, isn't he?
Yes.
We're just too anti-Semitic, apparently. A few more. Let me know if anything jumps off the page.
Peter Weigart, that's another crazy one.
Yeah, Nygaard International.
He was accused of child sex trafficking, as it says right there.
Yep.
So again, you have the entire setup here of the CIA network.
Yeah, and a lot of these multinational corporations. Bernard Arnault, he's a very wealthy.
And in Greece, all of those ship owners, several of them have come up in Operation Gladio because they traffic the people, the weapons, and the drugs. And so how convenient that they would have offshore bank accounts in order to account for their cut of the money.
All right, I'll pull up the Zelensky thing here in a second. Thanks for the help. Yeah, that ship owner stuff is hilarious to me. I mean, that's just really telling. Dan Gertler.
What?
Dan Gertler.
Oh my God. Ghost is
gonna Ghost to beat Patrick Henry when we need him.
Ghost is gonna just, y'all, if you've not heard him talk about Dan Goiter, that is like crazy. You're definitely gonna have to text him after the show. Because he's the guy that was going over to Africa unannounced, trying to intimidate different African leaders into continuing this black blood diamond trade out of their countries into Israel so that they could control the entire flow of diamonds. He got kicked out of countries. That is a bad guy. And this, to me, certainly heightens the fact that a lot of this was done nefariously.
You see that picture on the bottom right-hand corner of David Koch?
Yes.
I don't know where he is on the list, but he got himself a portrait, so he must have done something good. Yeah, some Kazakhstan. Carlos Slim. Not surprising. Once upon a time, the owner of the New York Times, richest man in Mexico. We want him owning the New York Times? I don't think so.
And he has his own little slush fund, huh?
Oh, yeah. Pakistan, Russia. Oh, a lot of Russia. These names are going to jump off. Roman Abramovich. Oleg Deripaska from Spygate.
Yes.
Oleg Tinkov, very interesting one.
Oh, and we've got a Bin Laden.
Oh yeah, Bakr bin Laden, chairman of the Saudi bin Laden group. I'm not going to know any of these Spanish names.
Let me see. But Juan Batista. I've come across that name.
We got Francisco Ortiz von Bismarck, businessman and economist, descendant of Otto von Bismarck, the man who united Germany.
Yeah, well, Otto von Bismarck is in the beginning of all of the Operation Gladio too, and setting up the networks.
It must have been one of his descendants, because Otto von Bismarck was in the 1870s. So is that a similar name, or one of his descendants maybe?
I think it may have been a junior, something like that, because that name has come up repeatedly.
Got it.
I don't know if maybe he was part of the philosophy of using it. I just recognize the name.
Got it. Sweden, Syria, more United Kingdom. Anything good here? Hugh Grosvenor.
Mellon. Wonder if that's the Mellon that we keep coming across.
Well, it says he's a billionaire businessman. Let's take a look real quick. Hang on. So from Carnegie Mellon. Yeah, the family from the Pittsburgh Mellon banking dynasty. So absolutely.
Of course. Why wouldn't they have an offshore account?
Sheldon Adelson, founder of Las Vegas Sands, among other things.
Yeah, Paul Allen of Microsoft.
Yep.
Thomas Barrick. Yeah, click on him for a second. Oh, Jeffrey Epstein's on there too.
Yeah, I saw it's going to jump off the page. We had to.
Okay, Epstein. So yeah, this is the same guy because he was the ambassador to Turkey. Yeah.
Yeah, I've run into, and I know what Colony Capital is.
Yeah.
Big real estate investor, Trump, REIT. All right, we skip over Epstein. I don't think he's worth mentioning. Carl Icahn, Charles and David Koch, Robert Kraft of the Kraft Group.
Wow, that's the guy that is that the same guy that was with like somebody that looked like his daughter here recently?
I don't know. I just remember when Kraft went public.
The Pierre Amener, however you say his last name. I just wrote about him like a day ago.
Yeah, he funds. I was actually going to talk about him yesterday. He funds a lot of the groups that we were looking into. Boy, I have to pull that up. Yeah, he funds a lot of the NGOs that are doing a lot of the stuff we don't really like. Robert Mercer's a big one.
That operates like CIA fronts.
Oh, here's our friend Steven Schwarzman, Skull and Bones, former founder of the Blackstone Group. He gets around.
And Steve Wynn.
Remember when I mentioned there's more last week? I said there's more to win than meets the eyes.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody wants to do a deep dive on Steve Wynn? There's a lot there. A lot of it's rumored, but entertainment personalities. I don't think these are that important. Nicole Kidman. I don't care about entertainment. Do you?
No.
Madonna. Harvey Weinstein. There you go. There's one worth looking at. Oh, Martha Stewart.
Oh, gosh. Talking about stock trades.
Well, she got a raw deal. What she did
for
Yeah, I know. That infuriates me. Look at all the American companies listed. Amazon, Apple, Bank of Utah. What are they doing about offshore funds? Goldman Sachs. Hey, Goldman, what are you doing with offshore funds? Blackstone Group, Twitter.
Where they hide all their gold that they stole during the Golden Lily thing.
Yeah. Universities. I've got Cambridge. I bet Oxford's on there, huh? Pembroke. These are all Cambridge schools. Here's all the Oxford schools.
Holy moly. They all have offshore bank accounts?
Yep.
Holy shit.
Let's look at the U.S. schools. Colgate, Columbia, Dartmouth, Duke. A few Ivy Leagues there. Princeton.
Oh, damn. Indiana University. That's my alumni.
Stanford. And, of course, at the bottom, we got Yale.
What the hell?
That was a fun dive.
All right. Are you almost done? I want to go back to one point.
I just want to finish up with Vladimir Zelensky. Just to,
right.
One of our friends in chat found the link for me. So this is from the Pandora Papers, not the Paradise Papers. So this is a previous one. Zelensky created a political party and named it after his television show, Servant of the People, blah, blah, blah. You're going to find that he had quietly transferred his so-called beneficial owner shares to the company of Sergei Sheffer, a close friend and business partner. They would become one of his closest presidential aides. And yeah, so yeah, Zelensky was laundering money, as we all already knew.
I'm shocked.
You want to go back to something?
So when we were talking about the Steve Mnuchin investment into the media company, and I told you that there were two people that I had, one of which I had come across, that Brett Ratner, because of the ties to the Miami thing. I had not looked into James Packer, who is the second of the two people that were running Steve Mnuchin's media company for him. What's very interesting about him, he's from Australia. Now we know how corrupt and involved Australia has been. Not only were they involved in the initial Russiagate with Downer, the diplomat from Australia, but they also hosted the Nugent Hand Bank and the mafia. During the Vietnam, they had a brothel set up down there that they were spying on service members when they brought them in from Vietnam on R&R. It just goes on and on and on. There's so much corruption down there. So my ears perked up when I just clicked on his name. He's an Australian billionaire businessman investor. His name is James Packer. Packer is the son of Kerry Packer, a media mogul. Now, where did Rupert Murdoch start his media empire?
The land down under?
In Australia. So do you think they know each other? So he is the grandson of Frank Packer. He inherited control of the family media as well as investments in what's called Crown Resorts. Now, Crown Resorts came up in some of the Operation Gladio stuff as well. So if you look through his early childhood, it talks about where he went to school and stuff, but it says that he acquired a stake in a online car sales thing, kind of like what we have here. But he sold Channel 9, which was part of the media package that his family had. Then it talks about a thing called One.Tel, which was a telecommunications company in Australia. And it says that there was a financial collapse of that company. And it said that in April 2014, Lachlan Murdoch, and yes, that is a Murdoch, and Packer agreed to a $40 million settlement. So they were actually in business with the Murdochs. And one of the companies that they had went under. And so there was a lawsuit, and it talks about the distribution of it. So just very interesting, the connections on who Steve Mnuchin was in business with.
Indeed. All right, so a little bit more about Mnuchin, and we'll close it up. He clashed big time with Peter Navarro over China, especially TikTok. Navarro wanted it banned and not just sold to a U.S. company. Mnuchin wanted it sold to a U.S. company. Mnuchin won that battle. I'm a big fan of Peter Navarro, so screw you, Mnuchin. Mnuchin was famous for totally dissing Greta Thunberg. He actually publicly told her to go to college and study economics before weighing in on policy. Apparently, she doesn't care about the environment anymore. To her, it's all about to free Hamas these days. Free Palestine. Mnuchin would marry an actress by the name of Louise Linton in 2017. And the person who presided over that wedding was none other than Mike Pence, the vice president. So putting this tax reform package together that Mnuchin did, and it was decent, but the team he was on is interesting. The other people, it's called the Big Six on tax reform, is Orrin Hatch, dirty, dirty, dirty.
Yes.
Mitch McConnell, dirty, dirty, dirty. Kevin Brady, Paul Ryan, dirty, dirty, dirty. And Gary Cohn. They worked with Mnuchin to lower the taxes. And I already showed you the graph of whether that hurt revenues, and it was pretty neutral. So they're the ones who put together the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act they're trying to make permanent right now in the BBB. I've got mixed feelings on it. It's better than what we had, but it's nowhere near the tax structure we should have. Mnuchin would instruct his staff to accept a non-low income housing tract in Nevada zone it as a opportunity zone, which gives you a lot of regulatory and tax benefits. The problem with that, it was right after he attended a Milken Institute event in Beverly Hills, and Michael Milken was an investor in that Nevada tract. So we got a lot of criticism on that, kind of dealing favors out to his buddy. That's what it seemed like. 2017, Mnuchin would announce the Treasury sanctions on Bashar Assad of Syria, citing the chemical weapons lie. The OPCW always said that Assad did not use chemical weapons on his people. That was all made up.
And it was.
2018, Mnuchin's one that put sanctions on Chinese Bank of Dandong, which is a North Korea gateway to other banking systems. 2018, he was the one who put sanctions on various Russian entities. And after January 6th, he was one of Trump's cabinet officials who actually actively discussed the 25th Amendment. In his defense, he said, "Of course I listened." They wanted to remove Trump before he got it through his last 2 weeks of office. And of course, that's just done to politically hurt Trump to stop him from ever running again. So that is Mr. Steve Mnuchin. And that is the last of our Skull and Bones members that we actually have records of. I'm doing some searches looking for similar patterns using AI. Say, okay, people that went to Yale University, gone to private boarding schools, and then ended up in certain positions, and I list the positions, and I haven't come up with any good names yet. Got a few gals. Let's see what I get there. I think I can find that.
And what's interesting about that is that harkens back to what I constantly harp on, is about recognizing patterns. Because what you just illustrated is there is a pattern, and we've established that pattern over and over and over again, that there may be more boarding schools other than the original 4 or 5 that we've hit fairly hard here, but there is a pattern to the development of these people that end up in these positions that have orchestrated this massive controlling network over all of us.
Yep. But it is sad that we do not have any more records, because I'm sure there's some people that are right in our government today that actually went through the same path of Skull and Bones, are connected to the same people. I'd like to know who they are, but I don't think we ever will, unless I make a stealth raid down to Yale.
Well, what's interesting is the technology is there now to be able to do that, because they have a building on the campus. It would be very easy to use the footage at Yale in and out of that building over time. And yeah, I mean, anybody out there that attends Yale or lives in the area and wants to go just kind of look around, you're more than welcome to do that, because I do think the information is out there. It's just a matter of how you get access to it.
Yep. I'm close enough I could take a drive. Well, that was a fun exercise going through the Skull and Bone members chronologically. I think next week we ought to just, I'll see if I can put together a package and just get quick summaries on everything we did in all these 15 or 20 episodes.
Or just the big takeaways. Here's the grooming schools at the, elementary, high school. Yeah. And just kind of walk through the takeaways of all of this and the impact that it's had, because it's crazy.
Yeah. Are you back in town next week or?
No, I will not be back until the 10th of July.
Yeah, I would think that grand finale of Skull and Bones may be a 2-hour show. We'll see. I'll try to condense it, but we'll see what we can get done.
Okay. Yeah. And I'll talk with you offline about what my availability is next week.
And then beyond that, I don't know, do we want to hit up some more of the American secret societies? I really want to get into foundations, but I also want to jump the pond and get to the Fabian socialists and all that stuff. So we'll talk about where we go next. But ladies and gentlemen, we started off with a theory that Skull and Bones, is it just a regular fraternal organization, or is it a little bit more? And I think we've shown a lot of connections that suggest it is a little bit more.
It's a whole lot more. Yeah, it may be running the world from behind the scenes.
They're certainly involved in that.
Yeah. So thanks again for joining us this week on our Operation Gladio Meets Secret Society series. And again, the next edition will be a summary of everything that we have gathered along the way. And then we'll be announcing where we're going to go from here. Thanks for joining me, Brady.
My pleasure. Cheers, everyone.